In the heart of Englewood, Chicago, where the wind carried the weight of forgotten dreams, the year was 2005, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of dust and despair. The streets lined with crumbling brick houses and rusted chain-link fences bore witness to a community clinging to survival. It was here, beneath a sky bruised with the gray of an impending storm, that the life of Tricia Morales, a 5-year-old black girl with eyes like polished obsidian, was forever altered. The rumble of bulldozers shook the earth, their steel teeth gnashing through the fragile homes of the neighborhood, tearing apart the only world Tricia had ever known. This was no mere demolition. It was the ruthless hand of the Altamonte Group, a corporate titan, led by the formidable Doña Rafaela Altamonte, carving out space for a glittering commercial empire that would never welcome the likes of Englewood's residents. The morning had begun with a deceptive calm that wraps a community in a fleeting illusion of safety. Tricia's mother, Carol Morales, stood at the threshold of their modest home, a patchwork of corrugated tin and weathered wood that had sheltered their small family through countless winters. Carol, a woman whose beauty was etched in the lines of resilience on her face, had spent her life weaving love into the fabric of scarcity. Her hands, calloused from years of cleaning houses in the wealthier neighborhoods of Chicago's North Side, now gripped the doorframe as she watched the encroaching machinery. Her voice, usually a melody of warmth, trembled with defiance as she shouted into the chaos, "This is our home. You can't take it from us." But her words were swallowed by the roar of engines and the cold directives blaring from the megaphone of the demolition crew. "This property belongs to the Altamonte Group. Vacate immediately or face consequences." Tricia, clutching a tattered rag doll, stood beside her mother, her small frame shivering not from the chill, but from the terror that pulsed through her veins. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, traced the silhouettes of men in hard hats, their faces obscured by the dust that rose like a mourning veil over Englewood. The crowd of neighbors, some weeping, some shouting, formed a desperate chorus of resistance, but their voices were no match for the relentless advance of progress, or so the Altamonte Group called it. Among them, Tricia's gaze caught a figure standing apart, a boy, no older than 10, his pale skin stark against the gray backdrop. Adrian Altamonte, the heir to the empire that was dismantling her world, stood on the edge of the chaos, his blue eyes fixed on the scene with an expression Tricia could not yet decipher: guilt, curiosity, or indifference. She would never know, for he turned away, vanishing into the shadow of his family's wealth. The air grew heavier as the bulldozers pressed forward, their steel blades tearing through the heart of Englewood. Carol, her heart pounding with a mother's fierce love, pushed Tricia behind her, shielding her from the encroaching destruction. "Stay here, baby," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of courage. She sprinted toward the crew, her arms raised, pleading for reprieve. "My daughter's things are still inside. Please wait." But the machine did not pause, and neither did fate. A wooden beam loosened by the relentless churn of the bulldozer groaned and fell, striking Carol with a force that silenced her cries. She crumpled to the ground, a crimson stain spreading across her temple, her eyes frozen in a final plea for mercy. Tricia's scream pierced the air, a raw, primal sound that seemed to shake the earth. She ran to her mother, her small hands clawing at the dust, trying to pull Carol's lifeless body from beneath the debris. "Mama, Mama, wake up," she sobbed, her voice breaking under the weight of a loss too vast for her young heart to comprehend. The crowd fell silent, their anger giving way to grief, but no one dared approach the girl whose world had just collapsed. The demolition crew, unmoved, continued their work, as if Carol Morales were merely an obstacle to be cleared. Tricia's eyes, blurred with tears, searched for help, landing again on Adrian. "Adrian, please!" she cried, her voice a desperate arrow shot into the void. But he was gone, swallowed by the crowd, leaving her alone with her mother's still form and the relentless grind of progress. The hours that followed were a blur of anguish. Neighbors too poor to risk involvement offered fleeting glances of pity before turning away. Carol's body, denied the dignity of a proper burial, was laid to rest in a makeshift cardboard coffin in a desolate corner of a South Side cemetery. Tricia knelt beside the grave, her small hands clutching the earth as if she could hold on to her mother's spirit. No candles burned, no prayers were sung. Only the wind whispered through the barren trees, carrying the weight of her solitude. Emmanuel, Tricia's father, stood beside her, his broad shoulders hunched under the burden of grief. Once bright with hope, his eyes were hollow, reflecting a man broken by a world that offered no mercy. "I'm sorry, Anak," he murmured, his voice cracking. "We couldn't even give her a proper farewell." Emmanuel, a factory worker, whose hands bore the scars of endless labor, vowed to protect his daughter. But the world had other plans. The loss of Carol left a void that no amount of love could fill, and the cost of survival swallowed their meager savings. Tricia, too young to understand the complexities of poverty, felt the sting of hunger and cold as they moved from one temporary shelter to another, beneath the shadow of an overpass, in the doorway of a shuttered church, or huddled in an abandoned lot. Each night, as the city's lights twinkled like distant stars, Tricia clung to her father's hand, her heart whispering a silent promise she would not let this world break her. But fate, relentless in its cruelty, struck again. 2 weeks after Carol's death, Tricia fell ill, her small body racked with fever, her cheeks flushed with heat, her lips cracked and dry. She whimpered, "It hurts, Papa." Emmanuel, his heart splintering with each of her cries, scoured the streets for help, but the clinics in Englewood were overburdened, and the pharmacies demanded money he did not have. Desperation drove him to a small convenience store in the heart of the South Side, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on shelves stocked with medicine and canned goods. His hands, trembling with both fear and resolve, slipped a bottle of paracetamol and a can of sardines into his worn backpack. The cashier, distracted by his phone, noticed nothing, but as Emmanuel stepped toward the door, an alarm shrieked and a burly security guard lunged forward, his voice booming. Thief Emmanuel's pleas were brushed aside. "It's for my daughter," he cried, his voice raw with anguish. "She's sick, please." But the guard's fist met his jaw, and a swift kick sent him sprawling. The police arrived, their handcuffs cold against his wrists, and Emmanuel was dragged away, leaving Tricia alone in the shadows of the station. She sat on the curb, her arms wrapped around her knees, her tears falling silently as the city moved on without her. In that moment, beneath the flickering streetlight, a seed of resolve took root in her heart, a vow that she would rise from this darkness, not as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with. The night was endless and unforgiving, until a soft voice broke through the silence. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" A woman, her face kind but weary, knelt beside Tricia, a clipboard in one hand and a blanket in the other. Helen Carter, a social worker at the Chicago Department of Children and Family Services, had seen too many children like Tricia. However, something in the girl's eyes, a flicker of defiance amidst the grief, stirred her heart. Wrapping the blanket around Tricia's trembling shoulders, Helen whispered, "You're not alone anymore." As Tricia's eyes fluttered shut, exhaustion claiming her, she felt the first faint stirrings of hope, like a candle flickering in a storm. Little did she know that this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would lead her from the ashes of Englewood to the heart of a battle for justice, love, and redemption. The West Loop of Chicago, a patchwork of gentrified lofts and forgotten corners, became Tricia Morales' new world in the wake of her mother's death and her father's imprisonment. The year was still 2005, but for Tricia time seemed to have stopped frozen in the moment when the earth swallowed her mother's lifeless body. The Tritre Mokoya gray brick building, tucked behind a noisy elevated train track, was both a sanctuary and a crucible. Its walls, stained with the echoes of countless broken dreams, housed children whose eyes mirrored Tricia's own, a blend of sorrow and unspoken defiance. Yet, within these confines, Tricia began to weave the first threads of a new life, one stitched together with the fragile hope that she could rise above the ashes of her past. The orphanage was a place of stark contrasts. The warmth of shared laughter among the children clashed with the cold indifference of overworked staff. Tricia, now 6, navigated this world with a quiet intensity. Her skin, a rich ebony that glowed under the dim fluorescent lights, marked her as different in a place where differences were often met with cruelty. The other children, some hardened by their own losses, taunted her with whispers of nobody's girl and mocked the tattered clothes she wore hand-me-downs from a donation bin. Yet Tricia bore their words with a stoic grace, her heart guarded by the memory of her mother's love. In the quiet hours of the night, she would slip into the orphanage's small library, a dusty room with sagging shelves, and lose herself in books. The pages of To Kill a Mockingbird and the Diary of Anne Frank became her refuge, their stories of courage whispering to her that she too could defy the odds. Among the yellowed pages, it was here that Tricia found a photograph tucked inside an old copy of Little Women. The image, creased and faded, showed Carol Morales smiling, her arm around a younger Emmanuel, their faces alight with a love that poverty could not dim. Tricia traced her mother's face with trembling fingers, her heart swelling with a bittersweet ache. The photograph became her talisman, a reminder of the family she had lost, and the promise she made to herself she would not let their deaths be in vain. As the city's lights glimmered beyond the orphanage windows each night, she whispered to the stars, "I'll make you proud, Mama. I'll make them pay." Her days were filled with the routine of survival school at a nearby public institution in the West Loop, where teachers often overlooked the quiet black girl in the back row. But one teacher, Ms. Evelyn Brooks, saw something in Tricia's eyes, a spark of brilliance that refused to be extinguished. Ms. Brooks, a black woman with a voice like warm honey, took Tricia under her wing, encouraging her to join the school's debate team and apply for scholarships. "You've got a fire in you, Tricia," she said one afternoon, handing her a worn copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God. "Don't let this world snuff it out." Those words, simple yet profound, planted a seed in Tricia's heart, one that would grow into a fierce determination to reclaim her future. By the time Tricia was 16 in 2015, she had transformed from a frightened child into a young woman of quiet strength. Her days at the orphanage were behind her, and she was placed in a foster home in the South Loop, where she lived with a kind but distant couple who saw her as a duty rather than a daughter. Yet Tricia thrived, her mind sharpened by years of self-study and her heart tempered by loss. She enrolled at a public university in Chicago, majoring in biology, with dreams of becoming a pediatrician, a dream born from the memory of her fevered nights and her father's desperate sacrifice. She worked nights at a fast food joint in the Loop to support herself, its neon sign casting a garish glow over the bustling streets. The work was grueling, and the customers were often unkind, but Tricia moved through her shifts with a grace that belied her exhaustion, her smile a shield against the world's indifference. It was on one such night, under the harsh fluorescence of the restaurant, that fate intervened. The crowd was thick, the air heavy with the scent of fries and desperation, when an older woman in a tailored coat collapsed near the counter. The other customers stepped back, their murmurs a cacophony of panic. But Tricia acted without hesitation. Kneeling beside the woman, she checked her pulse, her hands steady from the Red Cross training she had sought out in high school. "Someone call 911, she called, her voice cutting through the chaos. "And get me some water." She gently lifted the woman's head, her fingers brushing against silver hair, and spoke softly. "Ma'am, I'm Tricia. Just breathe slowly, okay? You're going to be fine." Laced with a tenderness she rarely showed, her words seemed to anchor the woman, whose eyes fluttered open with a faint spark of gratitude. The woman was Lillian Zaragoza, a philanthropist whose name graced hospital wings and scholarship funds across Chicago. As the paramedics arrived, Lillian's gaze lingered on Tricia, her voice weak but resolute. "You saved me, child," she whispered. "I won't forget this." Days later, a letter arrived at the foster home, sealed with the crest of the Zaragoza Foundation. Inside was an offer to change Tricia's life, a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore to study pediatric medicine. A note in Lillian's elegant script came with it. "Your courage reminds me of the daughter I lost. Let me give you the wings she never had." The offer was a lifeline and a spark that reignited the ember of vengeance in Tricia's heart. As she packed her meager belongings, her eyes fell on the photograph of her parents, now framed and tucked into her suitcase. The Altamonte Group, the faceless force that had torn her family apart, was no longer a distant specter. It was a target. In Baltimore, amidst the ivy-covered halls of Johns Hopkins, Tricia began to forge a new identity. She studied medicine and the art of strategy, learning from Lillian's connections in Chicago's elite circles how to navigate the world of power and privilege. Each lecture, each late-night study session was a step toward her goal to dismantle the empire that had crushed her family and to honor her parents' memory with a legacy of justice. Lillian became more than a benefactor. She was a mentor, a woman whose own losses had taught her the value of resilience. Over cups of tea in Lillian's elegant townhouse in Baltimore, Tricia absorbed lessons in finance negotiation and the subtle dance of influence. "The world respects power, Tricia," Lillian said one evening, her eyes gleaming with a knowing light. "But true power comes from understanding your enemies." Those words became Tricia's mantra. They guided her as she researched the Altamonte Group, uncovering whispers of their shady dealings, tax evasion, falsified reports, and a history of displacing communities like Englewood for profit. As Tricia's studies neared completion, she stood at a crossroads. The girl who had once knelt beside her mother's grave was gone, replaced by a woman whose heart burned with purpose. She adopted a new name, Tricia Anderson, a shield to protect her past and a sword to wield in her future. With Lillian's guidance, she invested her scholarship stipends in small but strategic ventures, building a modest fortune that would become the foundation of her plan. The Altamonte Group, with its gleaming headquarters in Chicago's Loop, was a fortress. But Tricia was no longer the helpless child of Englewood. She was a storm gathering strength, ready to return to the city that had broken her and claim the justice that was her birthright. Under the soft glow of a desk lamp, Tricia opened her laptop in the quiet dorm room and began to map out her return. She traced the names of Altamonte's board members' investments and weaknesses. Among them was Adrian Altamonte, now a rising star in the company, his face plastered across business magazines as the golden heir. The memory of his indifference that day in Englewood stung, but it also fueled her resolve. She would meet him again, not as the crying girl he had ignored, but as a woman who would make him see her and fear her. As the Chicago skyline loomed in her dreams, Tricia whispered to the photograph of her parents, "This is for you." The embers of her resilience had ignited into a flame, one that would light her path through the darkness of vengeance, and perhaps toward an unexpected redemption. The West Loop of Chicago, in the fading light of 2007, was a tapestry of contrasts, a neighborhood caught between the ghosts of its industrial past and the gleam of new lofts rising like sentinels of progress. This urban labyrinth was her crucible for Tricia Morales, now a lanky 12-year-old with eyes that held both the weight of loss and the flicker of unyielding resolve. The orphanage, a hulking brick structure shadowed by the clatter of the Green Line train, had become her reluctant home, its walls echoing with the laughter and tears of children, who like her carried scars no one could see. Yet within this confine of cracked plaster and shared sorrow, Tricia was forging herself anew, her heart a molten core of ambition, tempered by the memory of her mother's lifeless body and her father's desperate sacrifice. Life in the orphanage was a delicate dance between survival and defiance. Tricia, her rich ebony skin, a quiet rebellion against the taunts of her peers, moved through the days with a grace that belied her youth. The other children, hardened by their own fractured lives, flung cruel words her way. "Nobody's girl," they sneered, mocking her threadbare clothes and the way she clutched her mother's faded photograph like a talisman. But Tricia absorbed their barbs with a quiet dignity, her heart shielded by the love Carol Morales had woven into her soul. When the dormitory fell silent at night, she would slip into the orphanage's library, a sanctuary of dusty books and forgotten dreams. Under the dim glow of a flickering bulb, she devoured stories of resilience. Zora Neale Hurston's heroines, Frederick Douglass's unyielding spirit, each page whispering to her that she too could rise above the ashes of Englewood. The photograph of her parents, now creased from countless nights of tracing their faces, was her anchor. In the quiet library, Tricia would hold it close, her fingers brushing against her mother's smile and her father's steady gaze. "I'll make it right," she whispered, her voice a soft vow to the stars beyond the grimy windows. The memory of that day in 2005, when the Altamonte Group's bulldozers tore through her world, burned in her chest like a coal that refused to cool. She saw Adrian Altamonte's face in her mind's eye, his pale skin, his blue eyes that had met hers for a fleeting moment before turning away. That moment of abandonment, more than the loss itself, fueled a fire within her, a longing not just for justice, but for a reckoning that would shake the foundations of the empire that had crushed her family. School became her battlefield, where Tricia could wield her intellect like a sword. At the public middle school in the West Loop, where the hallways echoed with the clamor of adolescence, she was often overlooked, a black girl from the orphanage, invisible to teachers preoccupied with overcrowded classrooms. But Ms. Evelyn Brooks, a literature teacher with a voice like warm molasses and a heart that saw beyond appearances, recognized the spark in Tricia's eyes. "You've got a mind that could move mountains," Ms. Brooks said one afternoon, handing her a copy of "Their Eyes Were Watching God. Don't let this world tell you otherwise." Tender yet fierce words planted a seed in Tricia's soul, which grew into a vision of a future where she would not be defined by her pain, but by her power. Ms. Brooks became Tricia's guide, encouraging her to join the debate team, where her voice, clear, commanding, and laced with a quiet intensity, began to turn heads. She argued with a passion that belied her age, her words cutting through the noise of her peers like a blade through silk. "Justice isn't given, it's taken," she declared during a debate on civil rights, her eyes blazing with a conviction that silenced the room. Initially skeptical of the quiet girl from the orphanage, her teammates soon looked to her as a leader. Yet even as she shone, Tricia carried a secret burden, the knowledge that her victories were not just for herself, but for the parents she had lost. Each trophy, each scholarship application was a brick in the foundation of a plan she was only beginning to understand. By 16, at 2011, Tricia had left the orphanage for a foster home in the South Loop, a modest apartment where her foster parents, the Thompsons, treated her with a distant kindness. They were good people, but their home was a way station, not a haven. Tricia, now a young woman, with a presence that commanded attention, threw herself into her studies at a public high school, earning a reputation as a prodigy in science and literature. Her nights were spent in the public library, poring over biology textbooks and financial journals, her mind weaving a tapestry of knowledge that would serve her greater purpose. She began to research the Altamonte Group, piecing together fragments of their history land grabs in Chicago's poorest neighborhoods, hushed-up lawsuits, and whispers of corruption that never made the headlines. The name Adrian Altamonte appeared often, the golden heir, poised to inherit an empire built on the bones of communities like hers. The library became her war room, its quiet corners a place to plot her ascent. She clipped articles about the Altamonte Group, mapping their corporate structure, investments, and vulnerabilities. One evening, as the city's lights glimmered beyond the library windows, she found a photograph in a business magazine. Adrian, now a young man, standing beside his mother, Doña Rafaela, at a gala in Chicago's Gold Coast. His smile was polished, his suit tailored to perfection. But Tricia saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of unease, a crack in the facade of privilege. She traced his face with her finger, her heart tangled with anger and curiosity. "You didn't help me then," she murmured, "but you'll see me now." Her ambition was not without cost. The weight of her past pressed against her, a constant reminder of the family she had lost. She dreamed of her mother's laughter, her father's calloused hands, and woke with tears staining her pillow. Yet each morning, she rose with a renewed sense of purpose, her heart a furnace where grief and determination melted into resolve. Ms. Brooks, sensing the storm brewing within her student, invited Tricia to her small apartment one evening. Over cups of chamomile tea, she shared her own story, a black woman who had fought her way through a world that tried to diminish her. "You're not just fighting for yourself, Tricia," she said, her eyes soft but piercing. "You're fighting for every girl told she's not enough. Don't let that fire burn you out." Those words lingered as Tricia graduated from high school with honors, her name etched on a scholarship to the University of Illinois at Chicago. She chose biology, her dream of pediatric medicine, as a tribute to the nights her father had fought to save her from fever. But her studies were only part of her plan. In the quiet dorm room, she began to correspond with Lillian Zaragoza, the philanthropist who had glimpsed her potential years earlier. Now a distant but powerful ally, Lillian sent letters filled with advice on navigating the world of influence. "Power isn't loud," she wrote. "It's the quiet hand that moves the pieces." Tricia absorbed these lessons, her mind sharpening like a blade, her heart yearning for a day when she could stand before the Altamonte Group as a victim and as a reckoning. As she stood on the cusp of adulthood, Tricia Morales was no longer the girl who had wept beside her mother's grave. She was a young woman whose heart beat with the rhythm of justice, her eyes fixed on a horizon where the Altamonte Group would answer for their sins. The city of Chicago, with its towering skyscrapers and shadowed streets, was her battlefield, and she was ready to step into the fray, her ambition a flame that would light her path through the darkness. The Loop. Chicago's pulsing heart glittered under the neon glow of 2015, its skyscrapers casting long shadows over the dreams of those who toiled below. For Tricia Morales, now 20, the city was both a stage and a labyrinth, where she could weave her ambitions into reality. A junior at the University of Illinois at Chicago, she balanced her biology studies with a grueling job at a fast food restaurant in the heart of the Loop, where the scent of grease and coffee mingled with the hum of urban life. Her life was a delicate dance of discipline and desire, her heart a tapestry of grief and resolve, each thread woven with the memory of her parents' sacrifice. Yet it was here, amidst the clamor of orders and the flicker of fluorescent lights, that destiny would ignite a spark that would alter her path forever. Tricia, her ebony skin glowing under the harsh lights, moved through her shifts with a quiet elegance. Her warm but guarded smile disarmed impatient customers, while her hands, nimble from years of survival, worked with precision. She was a figure of quiet strength, her presence a subtle rebellion against the world that had tried to break her. Her nights were spent in her dorm poring over textbooks and financial journals, her mind a crucible where science and strategy fused into a vision of justice. The photograph of her parents, now framed beside her desk, was a constant reminder of her vow to rise from the ashes of Englewood and hold the Altamonte Group accountable for the blood on their hands. One frigid November evening, as the loop buzzed with the chaos of a Friday night rush, fate intervened with a force as sudden as a storm. The restaurant was a whirlwind of voices and clattering trays, when an older woman, her silver hair catching the light, swayed and collapsed near the counter. The crowd parted their gasps, a chorus of panic, but Trisha's instincts, honed by Red Cross training in high school, took over. She knelt beside the woman, her hands steady as she checked her pulse, her voice a soothing melody amidst the chaos. "Ma'am, I'm Trisha," she said, eyes locking onto the woman's fluttering gaze. "Just breathe with me, okay? You're safe now." She called for water, her tone calm but commanding, and gently lifted the woman's head, her touch a lifeline in the storm of fear. The woman was Lillian Zaragoza, a name synonymous with Chicago's philanthropy, her wealth a quiet force behind hospitals and scholarships. As paramedics arrived, Lillian's eyes, sharp despite her frailty, held Trisha's with a gratitude that went beyond words. "You didn't hesitate," she murmured as she was wheeled away. "I'll remember you." Days later, a letter arrived at Trisha's dorm, its crest embossed with the Zaragoza Foundation's seal. Inside was an offer that shimmered like a star in her shadowed world, a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore to study pediatric medicine. A note in Lillian's elegant script read, "Your courage is a gift. Let me help you shine." The offer was more than a lifeline. It was a doorway to a world Trisha had only dreamed of. She packed her bags, her heart, a kaleidoscope of hope and vengeance, and boarded a train to Baltimore. The photograph of her parents tucked safely in her suitcase. Johns Hopkins was a realm of ivy and ambition, its halls filled with minds that shaped the future. Trisha, a black woman in a sea of privilege, felt the weight of every stare, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that turned heads. Her professors noted her brilliance, her peers, her intensity, but none saw the fire that burned within her, a fire fueled by the memory of a bulldozer's roar and a mother's final cry. Lillian Zaragoza became more than a benefactor. She was a mentor, a beacon in Trisha's journey. Over tea in Lillian's Baltimore townhouse, surrounded by books and the scent of lavender, Trisha learned the art of power. "The world is a chessboard," Lillian said, her eyes gleaming with wisdom. "To win, you must know your opponent's moves before they do." Trisha absorbed these lessons, her mind weaving a plan to infiltrate the Altamonte Group's world. She studied finance alongside medicine and spent her nights studying market trends and corporate structures. Lillian introduced her to Chicago's elite bankers, lawyers, philanthropists, each connection a thread in her spinning web. In Baltimore, Trisha began to craft a new identity. Trisha Anderson, a name that cloaked her past in mystery and armed her for the future. She invested her scholarship stipends in small ventures, guided by Lillian's contacts, building a modest fortune that would become the foundation of her plan. The Altamonte Group, with its gleaming headquarters in Chicago's Loop, was a fortress of wealth and influence. But Trisha was no longer the helpless girl of Englewood. She was a strategist, her heart a crucible where grief and ambition forged a singular purpose. She scoured news archives, uncovering the Altamonte Group's history of displacing communities, their lawsuits buried under legal maneuvering, their profits stained with the blood of the forgotten. One evening, as the Baltimore skyline shimmered beyond her dorm window. Tricia found a photograph in a financial journal. Adrian Altamonte, now a rising star at his family's company, his blue eyes framed by a tailored suit. The sight of him stirred a storm in her chest, anger, betrayal, and a flicker of something she refused to name. She remembered his face from that day in Englewood, the boy who had turned away as her world crumbled. "You'll see me now," she whispered, her voice a vow to the night. She began to track his movements, deals, and weaknesses, and researched a map to the heart of the Altamonte empire. Sensing the fire in her protégé, Lillian invited Tricia to a gala in Baltimore, a glittering affair where the elite mingled under chandeliers. There, dressed in a borrowed gown that hugged her curves, Tricia practiced the art of influence, her smile a weapon, her words a dance. She charmed investors, her laughter a melody that masked her intent. "You're a natural," Lillian whispered, her eyes proud but wary. "But be careful, Tricia. Power is a flame that can burn you too." Those words lingered as Tricia returned to her dorm, her mind alight with possibilities. She was no longer just a student, but a woman on the cusp of greatness. Her heart, a compass pointing toward Chicago, and the reckoning that awaited. As her final year at Johns Hopkins approached, Tricia stood at a crossroads. The girl who had wept beside her mother's grave was a memory replaced by a woman whose ambition burned brighter than her pain. She had learned to navigate the world of privilege, speak its language, and wield its tools. The Altamonte Group, with its towering presence in Chicago, was her target, and Adrian Altamonte her key. She would return to the city that had broken her not as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with, her heart, a spark that would ignite a destiny she was only beginning to understand. The Chicago skyline shimmered like a constellation of ambition. In the spring of 2020, its glass towers reflecting the dreams and deceits of a city that never slept. For Tricia Morales, now 25, the Windy City was no longer just the backdrop of her childhood tragedies. It was the stage for her meticulously crafted vengeance. Gone was the girl who had wept beneath the shadows of Englewood's ruins. In her place stood Tricia Anderson, a black woman whose elegance masked a heart forged in fire, her every step a calculated dance toward justice. With the support of Lillian Zaragoza, her mentor and benefactor, Tricia had returned to Chicago, her mind a labyrinth of strategy, her soul a crucible of unresolved grief. The Altamonte Group, with its gleaming headquarters in the Loop, loomed as her target, and she was ready to infiltrate its world, not as a victim, but as a force cloaked in mystery and power. Tricia's new identity was a masterpiece of reinvention. As Tricia Anderson, she was a rising star in Chicago's nonprofit sector, her name whispered in elite circles as the founder of the Zaragoza Health Network, an NGO dedicated to providing free medical care to children in the South Side. Her office, a sleek space in the West Loop, was a testament to her success. Minimalist furniture walls, adorned with awards, and a window framing the city she had sworn to conquer. Yet beneath her polished exterior, tailored blazers, and poised smile, lay the heartbeat of a girl kneeling beside her mother's grave, vowing to make the Altamonte Group pay. The photograph of her parents, now tucked into a velvet-lined box in her desk drawer, was her silent compass, guiding her through the treacherous waters of ambition and retribution. Her return to Chicago was no accident. With Lillian's guidance, Tricia had spent her final years at Johns Hopkins University, mastering pediatric medicine and studying the art of influence. She had learned to navigate the world of wealth, to speak its language of power and privilege. Lillian's connections had opened doors to Chicago's elite bankers, philanthropists, and corporate titans who saw in Tricia a charismatic visionary. She attended galas in the Gold Coast, her laughter a melody that disarmed her eyes, a silent promise of secrets yet to be unveiled. But every handshake and smile was a step toward her goal, dismantling the Altamonte group from within. Trisha's first move was to invest in the stock market, using the modest fortune she had built from her scholarship stipends and Lillian's strategic advice. She targeted small stakes in companies linked to the Altamonte group, her purchases discreet but deliberate, like a spider weaving a web around its prey. Her research conducted in the quiet of her apartment, under the glow of a laptop screen, revealed the cracks in the Altamonte empire tax evasion scandals, buried by legal maneuvering community displacements, swept under the rug, and whispers of a boardroom divided by greed. At the heart of it all was Adrian Altamonte, now 30, the golden heir whose face graced the covers of Forbes and Chicago Business Journal. His blue eyes, once fleetingly indifferent in Englewood, now stared out from glossy pages, symbolizing the privilege Trisha was determined to challenge. The memory of Adrian's silence that day in 2005 haunted her, a wound that pulsed with every beat of her heart. She saw him in her dreams, standing at the edge of the demolition site, his back turned, as her mother's life bled into the dust. Yet there was something else in those memories, a flicker of hesitation in his gaze, a crack in his resolve that she could not ignore. It was this ambiguity that made her plan both dangerous and irresistible. She would meet him again, not as the crying girl he had abandoned, but as Trisha Anderson, a woman who could unravel his world with a glance. Her opportunity came at a charity gala in the Art Institute of Chicago, a glittering affair where the city's elite gathered under crystal chandeliers. Trisha, dressed in a midnight blue gown that hugged her curves, moved through the crowd with a grace that turned heads. Her skin, a rich ebony, glowed under the soft light, her presence a quiet rebellion against the predominantly white room. She was there to represent her NGO, but her eyes scanned the crowd for one figure, Adrian Altamonte. When she saw him standing by a marble pillar with a glass of bourbon in hand, her heart stuttered, not with fear, but with the thrill of a predator closing in on its mark. Adrian was a vision of privilege, his tailored suit accentuating his broad shoulders, his blonde hair catching the light like a halo. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, held a weariness that intrigued her. She approached him with a calculated ease, her smile a delicate balance of warmth and mystery. "Mr. Altamonte," she said, her voice a velvet caress. "I've heard so much about you." He turned his gaze, locking onto hers, and for a moment she saw a flicker of recognition, or perhaps it was merely curiosity. "And you are?" he asked, his tone polite but guarded. "Trisha Anderson," she replied, extending a hand. "I run the Zaragoza Health Network. We're doing some work in the South Side, work I think you'd find compelling." Her words were a lure, her eyes a challenge. Adrian's handshake was firm, his smile practiced, but a spark in his gaze hadn't been there in the photographs. "The South Side," he said, his voice softening. "That's a part of Chicago that doesn't get enough attention. I'd love to hear more." It was an invitation, and Trisha seized it, her heart pounding with the thrill of the game. They spoke for hours, their conversation, a dance of intellect and intrigue. Charmed by her passion and poise, Adrian shared fragments of his world, the pressures of running a corporate empire, and the weight of his mother's expectations. Trisha listened, her mind cataloging every word, every vulnerability. She learned of Doña Rafaela's iron grip on the Altamonte group, her obsession with legacy over ethics. She sees the company as her immortality. Adrian said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "But sometimes I wonder if it's worth the cost." Trisha's heart quickened, sensing an opening. But she kept her expression neutral, her smile a mask of empathy. As the gala drew close, Adrian offered to walk her to her car, a gesture that felt gallant and dangerous. The Chicago night was crisp, the city's lights a glittering backdrop to their parting. "You're not like anyone I've met," he said, his eyes searching hers. "There's something real about you." Trisha's smile was enigmatic, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. "You have no idea," she replied, whispering in the air. As she drove away, the city blurring past her, she felt the weight of her mission intensify. Adrian was not just a means to an end. He was a man whose vulnerabilities could either aid or unravel her. Back in her apartment, Trisha opened her laptop, her fingers trembling as she typed notes from the evening. Adrian's words, his fleeting moments of doubt, were pieces of a puzzle she was determined to solve. She pulled out the photograph of her parents, her eyes tracing their faces as tears threatened to fall. "I'm doing this for you," she whispered, her voice breaking. But as she closed her eyes, Adrian's face lingered, a man who had once turned away from her pain, but seemed poised to step into her orbit. The line between vengeance and something deeper was blurring, and Trisha knew that her greatest challenge would be keeping her heart from betraying her mission. The River North district of Chicago pulsed with life in the summer of 2020, its streets alive with the hum of ambition and the allure of secrets whispered in dimly lit lounges. For Trisha Anderson, the woman who had once been Trisha Morales, this vibrant enclave was her chessboard, each move a step closer to dismantling the Altamonte Group. At 25, she was a vision of poise and power, her ebony skin glowing under the city's lights, her eyes a storm of determination and unspoken longing. Her Zaragoza health network had become a beacon of hope in the South Side. Still beneath her altruistic facade, Trisha was weaving a web of vengeance. Her heart, a delicate balance of justice, and the dangerous pull of a man she could not ignore, Adrian Altamonte. Their first meeting at the gala had ignited a spark, one that Trisha both courted and feared. Adrian, with his blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, was the heir to the empire that had shattered her childhood, yet his vulnerability had caught her off guard. Their conversations, initially strategic on her part, had evolved into something more, a dance of words and glances that left her heart racing. She told herself it was part of the plan, a way to gain his trust and uncover the Altamonte Group's secrets. But the warmth in his smile, the sincerity in his voice, stirred emotions she had long buried. As she walked the tightrope between vengeance and vulnerability, Trisha knew that every step was a risk, every moment a chance to lose herself in the empire she sought to destroy. Her subsequent encounter with Adrian came at a private club in River North, a sanctuary for Chicago's elite, where jazz notes floated like whispers and whiskey glasses gleamed under soft lights. Trisha, dressed in a sleek black dress that clung to her curves, entered the club with the air of a woman who belonged. Her presence was a quiet rebellion, a black woman commanding a space where privilege reigned. She spotted Adrian in a corner booth alone, his fingers tracing the rim of a glass, his eyes lost in thought. The sight of him unguarded and solitary stirred a pang in her chest. A memory of the boy who had turned away from her cries, now a man wrestling with his own burdens. She approached with a calculated grace, her smile a delicate blend of warmth and mystery. Adrian Altamonte, hiding from the world. She teased, her voice a velvet caress. He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer, something dangerous. "Trisha," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "I didn't expect to see you here." She slid into the booth across from him, her movements fluid, her eyes never leaving his. "Sometimes the best plans are the ones you don't make," she replied, her words a lure, her heart a battleground. Their conversation flowed like a river, deep and unpredictable. Adrian spoke of the Altamonte Group's pressures, the boardroom battles, and his mother's relentless drive to cement their legacy. "She thinks it's about power," he said, his voice tinged with weariness. but sometimes it feels like a cage. Trisha listened, her mind cataloging his words, her heart wavering at the vulnerability in his tone. She leaned closer, her voice soft but probing. "And what do you think it's about Adrian?" He met her gaze, his eyes searching hers, as if seeking an answer he couldn't name. "I think it's about finding something real," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something worth fighting for." The air between them crackled, a charged silence that spoke louder than words. Trisha planned to exploit his doubts and draw out the secrets of the Altamonte group, but his sincerity was a tide pulling her under. She steered the conversation to safer ground, asking about his childhood, his dreams, anything to keep her heart at bay. But when he spoke of his mother's ruthlessness, how she had buried scandals to protect the family name, Trisha's pulse quickened. "She covered up a lot," he admitted, his voice heavy. "Things I didn't understand as a kid. Things I'm not sure I want to understand now." Her mind seized on the admission, a crack in the Altamonte facade, but her heart faltered, caught by the pain in his eyes. Adrian offered to drive her home as the night deepened, his chivalrous and intimate gesture. The streets of River North glowed with the city's restless energy, the lights reflecting in Trisha's eyes as they walked to his car. "You're different," he said, pausing by the driver's side, his gaze intense. "You see through the noise." Trisha's smile was enigmatic, her heart a storm of conflicting desires. "Maybe I just know what it's like to live in the shadows," she replied, her voice a whisper that lingered in the night. As she drove away in her own car, the city blurring past, she felt the weight of her mission intensify, and the pull of something more profound, a connection that threatened to unravel her carefully laid plans. Back in her West Loop apartment, Trisha sat at her desk, the photograph of her parents illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp. She opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys, as she documented Adrian's words, vulnerabilities, and hints of the Altamonte group's dark secrets. But as she wrote, her mind drifted to his smile, how his eyes had softened when he looked at her. She shook her head, chastising herself for the lapse. "This is for you, Mama," she whispered to the photograph, her voice trembling. "For you, Papa." Yet as she closed her eyes, Adrian's face lingered, a man who was both her enemy and her enigma, a puzzle she was determined to solve, even if it meant risking her heart. In the autumn of 2022, Chicago's Loop glittered like a crown of ambition, its skyscrapers piercing the sky with a promise of power that both seduced and betrayed. For Tricia Anderson, the woman who had sculpted herself from the ashes of Tricia Morales, the city was no longer a battlefield, but a throne room where she would claim her victory. At 27, she was a vision of strength and grace, her ebony skin radiant against the sleek lines of her tailored white blazer, her eyes a storm of resolve and unspoken longing. The Zaragoza Health Network, her beacon of hope for the South Side's forgotten children, had earned her accolades, but her silent war against the Altamonte group defined her. As she stood on the precipice of her greatest triumph, her heart trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of a vengeance that had become as much a part of her as the love she still carried for her lost parents. The Altamonte group's headquarters, a glass monolith in the heart of the Loop, was a fortress of privilege, its marble lobby echoing the footsteps of Chicago's elite. Tricia had spent months weaving her web, her investments in the company's stocks growing like ivy, silent but relentless. With Lillian Zaragoza's guidance, she had acquired 18% of the Altamonte Group's shares, a stake that made her a formidable player in a game once ruled by Doña Rafaela Altamonte. Her plan, meticulous and unyielding, was to infiltrate the boardroom, to sit among the titans who had crushed her family and force them to see her not as the weeping girl from Englewood, but as a woman who could reshape their empire with a single word. Her entry into the boardroom was a moment of quiet triumph, a scene painted in shades of power and defiance. On a crisp September morning, as the city hummed with the rhythm of commerce, Tricia stepped into the Altamonte Group's executive suite, her heels clicking against the polished floor, like the ticking of a clock counting down to reckoning. The board members, a cadre of older white men in tailored suits, turned to her with a mix of curiosity and disdain, their eyes narrowing at the sight of a black woman in their sanctum. But Tricia's presence was undeniable. Her poise, a silent challenge that filled the room with an electric tension. At the head of the table sat Doña Rafaela, her silver hair a crown of authority, her gaze as cold as the Chicago wind. Beside her was Adrian Altamonte, his blue eyes flickering with a mixture of surprise and unease as they met Tricia's. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lead broker began, his voice smooth, but tinged with deference. "Allow me to introduce Ms. Tricia Anderson, our newest shareholder and a visionary in the nonprofit sector." The room stirred whispers, rippling like waves, but Tricia remained composed, her smile a blade cloaked in velvet. "Thank you," she said, her voice a melody of confidence and command. "I believe the Altamonte Group has potential that's been squandered, potential that demands a sharper vision, a global perspective, and a commitment to integrity." Her words laced with a subtle challenge hung in the air, and she saw Adrian's throat tighten, his eyes searching hers for a truth he could not yet grasp. The meeting unfolded like a chess match. Each move was calculated, and each word was a gambit. Tricia presented her vision for the company, a shift toward sustainable investments, community-focused initiatives, and transparency that would burn away the shadows of corruption. The board members scoffed their skepticism, a wall she was determined to breach. But to everyone's surprise, Doña Rafaela leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with a spark of intrigue. "Ms. Anderson," she said, her voice sharp as cut glass, "you speak of legacy and liquidity, two things this company needs. Your background in Singaporean fintech is impressive. Tell me what drives you." Tricia's heart quickened, but her smile remained steady, a mask of composure. "I believe in rebuilding empires, not shaking them," she replied, her words a delicate dance of truth and deception. "I want to see the Altamonte Group rise above its past mistakes." The irony of her words burned in her chest, but she saw the approval in Rafaela's eyes, a rare crack in the matriarch's armor. Adrian, however, remained silent, his gaze fixed on Tricia, as if sensing the storm beneath her calm exterior. The meeting ended with a tentative nod from Rafaela, a signal that Tricia had secured a foothold in their world, a foothold she would use to bring it crashing down. Outside the boardroom, in the quiet of a private lounge overlooking the Chicago River, Tricia allowed herself to breathe. The city's lights danced on the water, a mirror to the fire in her heart. She pulled out the photograph of her parents, her fingers tracing their faces as tears threatened to fall. "I'm almost there," she whispered, her voice a vow to the ghosts that guided her. But as she stood, her thoughts drifted to Adrian. His quiet intensity and eyes seemed to see through her facade. Their encounters had grown more frequent, their conversations a tangle of intellect and unspoken longing. He was her key to the Altamonte Group's secrets, but also a man whose vulnerability stirred something in her she could not name. Their next meeting came at a fundraiser in the Gold Coast, a glittering affair where Chicago's elite mingled under chandeliers. Tricia, in a crimson gown that flowed like a river of fire, moved through the crowd with a grace that turned heads. Adrian found her by a window, the city's skyline framing her like a portrait of defiance. "You were impressive today," he said, his voice low, his eyes searching hers. "But I can't shake the feeling there's more to you than you let on." Trisha's smile was enigmatic, her heart a battleground of strategy and sentiment. "Maybe there is," she replied, her voice a whisper that lingered in the air. "But isn't that what makes life interesting?" Their conversation stretched into the night, a delicate dance of words and glances that left Trisha's heart racing. Adrian spoke of his dreams to break free from his mother's shadow, to build something meaningful, but his words were laced with a weariness that tugged at her. She listened, her mind cataloging his vulnerabilities, but her heart wavered, caught by the sincerity in his gaze. As they parted, his hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through her. "You're changing things, Trisha," he said, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. "I just hope I can keep up." She smiled, but inside her heart trembled, torn between her sworn vengeance and the connection she could not deny. Back in her apartment, Trisha sat at her desk, the photograph of her parents illuminated by a single candle. She opened her laptop, her fingers trembling as she typed notes from the day boardroom dynamics. Rafaela's approval, Adrian's doubts. But as she wrote, her mind drifted to his touch, words, and eyes. She shook her head, chastising herself for the lapse. "This is for you," she whispered to the photograph, her voice breaking. But as she closed her eyes, Adrian's face lingered, a man who was both her enemy and her enigma, a puzzle she was determined to solve, even if it meant risking everything she had fought for. In the waning days of 2022, the Gold Coast of Chicago was a realm of opulence and secrets, its elegant townhouses and private clubs hiding truths that could shatter empires. For Trisha Anderson, the woman who had risen from the ashes of Trisha Morales, this gilded enclave was the stage for her most perilous act. At 27, she was a vision of power and grace, her ebony skin glowing under the soft lights of a members-only lounge, her eyes a tempest of resolve and unspoken sorrow. Her Zaragoza health network had become a beacon of hope, but her true mission to dismantle the Altamonte group had brought her to the precipice of a reckoning. As she stood on the edge of her vengeance, her heart trembled not with doubt, but with the weight of a truth that could either free her or consume her. With its velvet drapes and jazz-infused air, the lounge was a sanctuary for Chicago's elite, where deals were sealed and secrets whispered. Trisha had been invited by Doña Rafaela herself, a rare gesture that both thrilled and unnerved her. She had spent months infiltrating the Altamonte group, her 18% stake in the company, a silent sword she wielded with precision. Her encounters with Adrian Altamonte had grown more frequent, their conversations a delicate dance of intellect and emotion that left her heart in turmoil. She told herself it was a strategy to uncover the company's darkest secrets. Still, his vulnerability, his quiet confessions, his fleeting touches had begun to blur the line between vengeance and something deeper, something she dared not name. The evening began with a deceptive calm, the lounge's soft lights casting shadows that danced like specters of her past. Trisha, in a tailored black suit that hugged her curves, entered with a poise that silenced the room. Doña Rafaela awaited her at a private table, her silver hair gleaming like a crown, her eyes cold but curious. Adrian was absent, a fact that both relieved and unsettled Trisha. "Ms. Anderson Rafaela," said, her voice a blade cloaked in silk, "you've made quite an impression. But I don't trust easily. Tell me, what do you want from my family?" Trisha's heart pounded, but her smile was a mask of composure, her eyes a storm of unspoken truths. "I want to see the Altamonte group thrive," she replied, her voice a melody of deception and defiance. "But only if it's built on truth, not lies." Rafaela's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face, but she leaned back intrigued. "You speak boldly," she said. "I admire that. But be careful. Snakes slither into empires, and I've seen my share." Trisha's smile deepened, a silent challenge. I'm no snake, Mrs. Altamonte. I'm a woman who knows what she wants. Their conversation was a chess match, each word a move, pause, a strategy. Tricia spoke of innovation, of redirecting the company's resources to community initiatives, but her true intent was to probe Rafaela's defenses. She mentioned Englewood, her voice steady, but laced with a subtle edge. Communities like that deserve better, she said. They've been torn apart by greed. Rafaela's expression hardened a crack in her polished facade. Business is not charity, she replied, her tone sharp. Progress demands sacrifice. Tricia's heart burned, but she held her ground, her smile a blade that cut deeper than Rafaela could know. As the conversation drew close, Tricia sensed the moment she had been waiting for. She leaned forward, her voice low, her eyes locking onto Rafaela's. Do you remember Carol Morales? She asked, her words a whisper that carried the weight of a lifetime. Rafaela's face froze, her eyes widening for a fleeting moment, before narrowing again. I don't know that name, she said, but her voice betrayed a tremor. Tricia's smile was cold, her heart a furnace of rage and sorrow. You should, she said. She was my mother, the woman your company buried in Englewood along with her dignity. The air in the lounge seemed to still, the jazz notes fading into a distant hum. Rafaela's composure cracked, her hands gripping the table as if to anchor herself. You're mistaken, she said, but her voice was hollow, her eyes haunted by a truth she had tried to bury. Tricia's voice was steady, each word a hammer striking the anvil of her past. She begged for time, for mercy, but your bulldozers didn't stop. She died under a beam, her blood on your hands. And I was there, a child, watching my world collapse. You took everything from me, my mother, my father, my home. But I'm here now, and I own you. Rafaela's face paled, her breath shallow, but she said nothing, her silence a confession. Tricia stood, her posture regal, her heart a storm of triumph and pain. You built your empire on my mother's grave, she said, her voice breaking, but resolute. And now I'll tear it down, piece by piece. She turned to leave, her heels echoing in the silent lounge, but she sensed a presence as she reached the door. Adrian stood there, his face a mask of shock, his blue eyes wide with realization. He had heard everything, every word, a dagger that pierced the illusion of his world. Outside in the fabulous Chicago night, Tricia leaned against a lamppost, her breath visible in the air, her heart racing with the weight of her revelation. The city's lights glittered like stars, but they offered no comfort. She had bared her soul and exposed her truth, but the victory felt hollow, shadowed by the pain in Adrian's eyes. Their connection, once a tool in her arsenal, had become a chain around her heart. She pulled out the photograph of her parents, her fingers trembling as she traced their faces. I did it, she whispered, tears falling silently. But why does it hurt so much? Back in her apartment, Tricia sat in darkness, the only light from her laptop screen. She typed furiously, documenting Rafaela's reaction and the Altamonte facade crack, but her thoughts kept returning to Adrian. His silence, his shock, the way his eyes had searched hers for a truth he could not bear. She had won a battle, but the war was far from over, and her heart was caught in the crossfire, torn between the vengeance she had sworn and the man who was beginning to see her, truly see her for the first time. In the crisp dawn of September 22nd, 2025, Chicago's skyline stood as a monument to ambition and ruin, its glass towers reflecting the first light of a day that would mark the unraveling of an empire. For Tricia Anderson, the woman who had sculpted herself from the ashes of Tricia Morales, this moment was the culmination of a lifetime's vow. At 27, she was a vision of unyielding strength, her ebony skin glowing with a quiet defiance, her eyes a tempest of triumph, and unspoken sorrow. The Zaragoza Health Network had made her a beacon of hope for the South Side, but her true mission to bring the Altamonte Group to its knees had reached its zenith. As she stood in the heart of the loop, preparing to face the world, her heart trembled, not with doubt, but with the weight of a justice that had cost her everything, including the man who had begun to unravel the walls around her soul. The confrontation with Doña Rafaela in the Gold Coast Lounge had been a spark, igniting a firestorm that now swept through Chicago. Tricia had bared her truth, her voice a blade that cut through the Altamonte Group's polished facade, revealing the blood on their hands, her mother's blood, her father's sacrifice, the countless lives crushed under their greed. The city, once indifferent to the cries of Englewood, now buzzed with whispers of scandal. Tricia, as Tricia Anderson, had become a force. Her 18% stake in the Altamonte Group was a scepter of power she wielded with precision. But her next move, a public reckoning, would bring the empire to its knees. The press conference was held in a cavernous hall in the Loop, its windows framing the city's restless pulse. Tricia stood at a podium, her white suit a stark contrast to the dark weight of her words, her presence commanding the room. Journalists, activists, and community leaders filled the seats, their eyes fixed on the woman who had emerged from obscurity to challenge a titan. Behind her stood a screen, its images, a gallery of pain photographs of Englewood's demolished homes, documents detailing the Altamonte Group's tax evasion, and audio recordings of boardroom confessions. But the heart of her presentation was the voices of the forgotten families displaced, workers' exploited lives shattered by the Altamonte machine. "My name is Tricia Morales." She began, her voice a melody of resolve and grief. The name a bombshell that silenced the room. 15 years ago, the Altamonte Group tore my family apart. My mother, Carol Morales, died under their bulldozers in Englewood, her pleas ignored. My father, Emmanuel, was imprisoned for trying to save me, a child left to fend for herself in a world that didn't care. Today, I stand here not for vengeance, but for justice, for every family they've crushed, every voice they've silenced. Her words, laced with a quiet ferocity, echoed through the hall, each syllable a hammer striking the anvil of truth. The screen behind her flickered to life, displaying testimonies from Englewood's survivors. A mother spoke of losing her home, her voice breaking as she clutched a child's toy. A worker recounted being fired without cause, his savings drained by medical bills. Tricia stepped aside, letting their stories take center stage, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm not here to speak for them," she said, soft but unyielding. "I'm here to give them the platform they've been denied." The room erupted in applause, but Tricia's heart was heavy, her thoughts drifting to Adrian Altamonte, who watched from a corner, his face a mask of anguish and awakening. The fallout was swift and merciless. The FBI, prompted by Tricia's meticulously gathered evidence, launched an investigation into the Altamonte Group. By noon on September 22, 2025, news channels buzzed with reports of Doña Rafaela's arrest, her elegant figure handcuffed as she was led from the Altamonte headquarters. The city's streets, particularly in Englewood, erupted in protests, residents chanting Tricia's name as a symbol of hope. Social media, a wildfire of voices, amplified her story, with hashtags like #JusticeForEnglewood trending across platforms. Tricia, watching the coverage from her West Loop office, felt a hollow triumph. She had toppled an empire, but the cost was etched in the pain she saw in Adrian's eyes. The man who had heard her truth now bore its weight. Adrian sought her out that evening, his figure a silhouette against the Chicago River's shimmering surface. The air was cool, the city's lights a constellation of dreams and betrayals. "Tricia," he said, his voice raw, his blue eyes haunted by the truth she had unveiled. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what my family did to you." His words were a plea, but Trisha's heart was a fortress, its walls built from years of grief. "You saw me that day," she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "You saw me crying for my mother, and you turned away. Knowing or not, you chose their world over mine." Adrian's face crumpled, his hands trembling as he reached for her, but she stepped back, her eyes a storm of resolve and regret. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, his voice breaking. "But please don't let this destroy you too." Trisha's heart wavered, the memory of their shared moments. His laughter, his vulnerability, clashing with the image of her mother's lifeless body. "This isn't about destruction," she replied, her voice soft, but unyielding. "It's about making things right for my parents, for Englewood, for every soul your family crushed." She turned away, her heels clicking against the pavement, her heart a battlefield, where justice and love waged a silent war. Back in her apartment, Trisha sat in darkness, the photograph of her parents illuminated by a single candle. She traced their faces, her tears falling silently as she whispered, "I did it, Mama. Papa. I kept my promise." But the victory felt incomplete, shadowed by the pain in Adrian's eyes, the man who had become both her adversary and her anchor. She opened her laptop, her fingers trembling as she typed a final report detailing the Altamonte Group's downfall to Lillian Zaragoza. "It's done." She wrote her words heavy with triumph and loss. "But I don't know what comes next." As she closed her eyes, the city's hum, a distant lullaby. She felt the weight of her journey, a journey that had brought her justice, but left her heart yearning for something more. In the quiet twilight of September 22nd, 2025, Chicago's Englewood stirred with a new kind of hope, its streets no longer defined by the scars of demolition, but by the promise of renewal. For Tricia Morales, now 27, the city was no longer a battlefield, but a canvas where she could paint a future free from the shadows of her past. Her ebony skin glowed under the soft light of a community center's opening ceremony. Her eyes, a constellation of resolve and newfound peace. The Zaragoza Health Network had grown into a national force, its mobile clinics healing forgotten corners. Still, her personal journey from vengeance to redemption defined this moment. As she stood among the people of Englewood, her heart trembled not with anger, but with the fragile hope of a woman learning to love again, despite the ghosts that lingered. The fall of the Altamonte Group had been a seismic event, its echoes reverberating through Chicago's elite circles and beyond. Doña Rafaela's arrest, the public outcry, and the dismantling of the company's corrupt practices had made Tricia a symbol of justice, her name whispered with reverence in the South Side. She had relinquished her controlling stake in the Altamonte Group, redirecting its assets to fund housing and healthcare initiatives in Englewood, a tribute to her parents' memory. The photograph of Carol and Emmanuel Morales, once a talisman of pain, now rested in a frame on her desk, a reminder of the love that had carried her through the darkness. Yet the victory had come at a cost. Adrian Altamonte, the man who had once turned away from her cries, had become a mirror to her vulnerabilities. Their encounters, once a strategic dance, had evolved into something more profound, a connection that challenged her resolve. After the press conference, Adrian had vanished from the public eye, resigning as CEO and retreating from the Altamonte legacy. Tricia, too, had withdrawn, her heart a tangle of triumph and longing. She threw herself into her work, overseeing the construction of a housing complex in Englewood, its modest homes a stark contrast to the towering greed of the Altamonte Group. But at night, in the quiet of her West Loop apartment, she found herself haunted by Adrian's face, the pain in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice. 3 years later, in the spring of 2028, Tricia stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Englewood Community Center, a beacon of hope built on the ground where her mother had died. The air was warm, the sky a canvas of soft pinks and golds, and the crowd was excited families, children, activists, all gathered to celebrate a new beginning. Tricia, in a simple cream blouse and jeans, spoke to the crowd, her voice a melody of strength and grace. This is for every family who lost their home, every child who lost their hope. She said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. This is for my parents, Carol and Emmanuel Morales, who taught me that love is stronger than loss. The applause was thunderous, but Tricia's heart was elsewhere, searching the crowd for a face she hadn't seen in years. He appeared as if summoned by her thoughts, his blonde hair catching the sunlight, his blue eyes softer now, tempered by time. Adrian Altamonte, no longer the corporate prince, stood at the edge of the crowd, his sleeves rolled up, his hands stained with the dust of volunteer work. He had joined the Zaragoza Health Network as a field strategy consultant, a quiet act of atonement that had surprised Tricia. Their eyes met, and the world fell away momentarily, leaving only the unspoken bond that had survived their shared pain. "Tricia," he said, approaching her with a cautious step, his voice a whisper of hope. "You're back." "I never really left," she replied, her smile a delicate bridge between their past and present. "Why now, Adrian?" Her voice was gentle, free of accusation, but heavy with curiosity. He looked at her, his eyes a mirror to her own struggles. "Because I couldn't stay away," he said, his voice raw with honesty. "I've spent 3 years trying to be the man you deserved back then, the man who should have stood by you. I want to help you build this, whatever this is." His simple yet profound words stirred something in Tricia's heart, a flicker of trust, a spark of possibility. Their reconnection was tentative, a dance of healing rather than passion. They worked side by side, distributing water and school supplies to Englewood's children, their laughter mingling with the sounds of hope. Adrian, no longer bound by his family's legacy, was a man reborn, his hands calloused from labor, his eyes bright with purpose. "You're different," Tricia said one evening as they sat on a bench overlooking the community center, the sky ablaze with stars. "So are you," he replied, his smile soft but sure. "You're not fighting anymore. You're building." Her heart swelled the weight of her vengeance, lifting like mist in the morning sun. They visited the cemetery in Rizal, a quiet place on Chicago's outskirts, where Carol and Emmanuel rested. Tricia knelt beside their graves, her fingers tracing the marble, her tears falling silently. "I kept my promise," she whispered, her voice a prayer. Standing beside her, Adrian laid a bouquet of white roses at Emmanuel's grave, his eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking, "for showing me what justice really means." Tricia looked at him, her heart a canvas of forgiveness and hope. And for the first time, she felt free, not from her past, but from its hold on her future. Their bond grew slowly, rooted in respect rather than romance. They built homes, organized health clinics, and shared quiet moments under Chicago's starry skies. One evening, as they walked through Englewood, the streets now alive with laughter, Adrian took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Can I walk you home?" he asked, his voice a promise. Tricia smiled, her heart light. "This time, yes." She said, her words a bridge to a new chapter, one not defined by vengeance, but by the possibility of love. As they stood beneath a streetlight, the city humming around them, Tricia felt a peace she had never known. The girl who had wept in Englewood was gone, replaced by a woman who had chosen herself, her community, and the man who had decided to stand by her. The stars above were no longer distant. They were a map to a future she could finally embrace. If you like this story, please share your thoughts in the comments section and share the story with your friends. Please like and subscribe to the channel to help motivate me to write more good and meaningful stories. Thank you for watching.